This is a Renew original recording. Hello and welcome to Season 3 of Believe in People, the British podcast award-winning series exploring addiction, recovery and the stigma that surrounds them. I'm Matthew Butler, your host, or as I like to say, your facilitator. Today I'm with Ed Edwards, award-winning playwright and author of The Political History of Smack and Crack. His powerful play exploring addiction, recovery, love, Thatcherism and Britain's heroin epidemic. Drawing on his own experiences of addiction, prison, the hierarchy of drug use and long-term recovery, Ed helps us understand why addiction is never just personal, it's also shaped by politics, poverty, stigma and the communities people come from. I begin today's conversation by asking Ed about the central characters in his play, Mandy and Neil, and how much all of that story comes from Ed's own journey and why theatre became the vehicle to tell it.
Obviously, I've sat in NA meetings. I think when I written that, I'd probably sat in it going on for 25 years. I'd been in it, but I did have a relapse in the middle of my recovery, so it isn't continuous recovery. But, I got into recovery in 92 probably. But I'd been a political activist before that. And there was always that question of, in politics of what is the relationship between the individual and society and all that. Plus, I'd seen a lot of dramas over the years about drugs which never cover the political side of it. It's the same. Oh, well, I'm going to get distracted talking about politics now, but I'd never seen anything which, like Christiana F, for example, it's all about the degradation of using and where it takes you, how gloomy it is. Basketball Diaries, pretty similar. There's 2 minutes at the end about recovery. And he sort of miraculously gets clean. And I wanted, obviously with my experience of getting clean, to write something about recovery as well as the stuff about addiction. But I was always interested in the politics too. And the idea, I think, there's a line in the play where which is a verbatim line, which I heard in jail myself, because we'll come on to this later, but I got busted and did 3.5 years in jail. So in jail, I met absolutely loads of addicts, and I also met addicts who were kind of better off in jail, because I bumped into the guys in jail. They'd been like buff, down the gym every day, not touching drugs. Even the ones who were touching drugs weren't in anything like the trouble they'd be outside. I mean, you get into a bit of trouble, you might get a little bit of a beating or whatever, but it's not the same as being absolutely strung out on gear or crack. So in jail, there was a lot, and I'd bump into people late, 6 months after I got out or a year after I got out, guys who'd been, really fit, clean living, happy, in the way you can be in jail, if you're not in trouble. And they were on the streets sweating, strung out, absolutely wrecked. And you just knew that they were living back in that life.
Yeah.
So anyway, while I was in jail, there was this Scouser. And one day it was like, I can't remember how it even came up in conversation about the riots that had happened in 1981. You're probably too young to even remember that. But I
was born in 91, so if that gives you some context. But
10 years before you were born, every major city in England burned. There was an uprising against the basically police brutality, which came in. Obviously, it had always been there in the black communities, inner city communities, but since Thatcher had been there and unemployment had skyrocketed, there was a massive crackdown on the black population and the working class populations in the inner cities. And in 1981, massive uprisings in Liverpool, Leeds, North London, South London, in other words, Tottenham and Brixton, Bristol, Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, all those cities, major uprisings. And there was this Scouser on the landing. And he said, I tell you what, I'm not going to do a particularly good Liverpool accent. Tell you what, we taken Liverpool that night. The police had to fight their way back into Liverpool. 2 years later, I'm jumping over the offie. I'm jumping over the counter in an offie, trying to feed a habit. You work it out. And I was like, oh, yeah, do you know what I mean? And I'd been a political activist in the 80s after the riots. And I'd really noticed, because I used to go out and score weed at that time. And then one time I went down to, must have been about 85, and I'd come to Manchester in 83 probably. And, if you couldn't get weed from a dealer, you'd go to the middle of Moss Side to score. And you'd score like a £1 draw in the betting office there, and they'd have the weed wraps in the where your betting slips are, and you just go and score if there was nothing else. And I went down there. I must have run out of places to score. I couldn't get any weed. You know what it's like. And then I'd sort of gone down to the place in the Moss Side Centre, which doesn't exist anymore, and seen a guy I recognised, have you got anything to smoke? And he goes, yeah, just wait there. Comes back, and I was expecting a £5 draw, and he was like, he had all these bags of heroin. And I was like, oh. I said, I wanted a weed. He said, oh, you can't get weed here now. It's all brown, I was like, oh, fuck. This is before I got into any hard drugs at all. I was just smoking weed all the time, really addictively, but hadn't gone down any of those roads yet. And I just really thought, fucking hell, that's a big change, I didn't really register it properly, but at that time we were involved in a political campaign in the middle of Hume, Moss Side, which were the sort of mixed race areas, really, trying to stop a guy getting deported back to Sri Lanka. And he was a communist, and he sort of introduced me to communist politics. And in the wake of the riots, this guy's theory was that the police he'd taken sanctuary in a church in Manchester to stop being deported to Sri Lanka. And he was a communist. So in Sri Lanka, he was in danger from the right-wing government there, who were having a war with, it's a complicated situation, but they were at war with the Tamils at that time. And he was a supporter of the Tamils. If he got back, he was a target. Anyway, so the church, which was a Church of England church, had given him sanctuary. And we were involved in this campaign. And basically, he thought that if the police came in and raided a church in the middle of Hume a few years after the riots, local people, they just wouldn't dare do it because of what had happened. And those areas were, notorious for standing up to the police. And of course, this was 1985 by now, but it was definitely not a political hotbed in that area then. And you'd started to notice the depoliticisation of that area. And it was only when I heard that guy in jail going, I'm jumping over the counter and offer you work it out, when they'd cleared Liverpool of the police and taken it over. And I started to put two and two together and think, is there a connection between this wave of heroin that's come in just after the uprisings against Thatcher? And thought, well, that's something I could look into. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, so I had that as a project, how as a writer you'll often have ideas on the back burner sort of thing. And years later, I was teaching a class. I was clean by now. Well, I was clean in jail, actually, but we'll come to that. But I was teaching a class, and, politics had sort of died by the middle of the 90s, really. In Britain, and the sort of tide of politics had been driven back, and I think it was after the hunger strikers in Ireland had been defeated, and the riots had happened, and then the miners' strikes came and went, and the miners had been defeated, and then the Berlin Wall comes down, and the communism is driven back, and politics sort of disappeared off the face of the earth in Britain. But by the middle of the 90s, I was teaching in a drama school, and I'd actually got too many hours on this physical theatre course. And the students and I said, look, what we could do is every so often I could fill in a bit of time by giving you a lecture on politics, because you're actors, you're going to need to know what's going on in the world. Are you interested? And they said, oh yeah, definitely. And I'd sensed there was a bit more interest in politics again. So I put a load of titles on the board of what we could cover, and one of them, literally off the top of my head, said the political history of smack and crack. And they went, oh yes, that one.
Had you been open about your recovery to the students at that time, or did it?
I wasn't secret. No.
Okay.
I wasn't secret. No. But I mean, I didn't sort of openly talk about it, but I wouldn't have covered it up, if anybody, and obviously you can see some students sometimes are more, you can see students who are struggling with drugs and stuff. You can tell. So you might just say, if you need help, there's Narcotics Anonymous, you know what I mean? But so when they said the political history of smack and crack, I thought that was a really good introduction to politics, because you'd get the whole idea of Thatcher, but then you also had, because smack and crack basically come from Afghanistan and Colombia, which is the Nicaraguan revolution was destroyed by people who were funded through drugs, and the Afghan revolution was destroyed through people who were funded by drugs. So in Afghanistan, it was heroin that was funding the opposition to the Afghan revolution at that time, and it was cocaine that was being used to fund the people who were opposing the Nicaraguan revolution. And then that was being turned into crack in America. And of course, the heroin was flooding Europe at that time, which was only something I discovered later. After I told you that I'm going around in circles here, but I told you I'd gone to score. The guide said
that's what I was going to ask you. So I wanted to come back to that. Actually,
Yeah.
did you follow it up with the brown then at the time, or?
No, that was later. I didn't sort of. Oh yeah, I'll have that instead.
Yeah, well, that's kind of how, with the way you said it at first. It was almost like, yeah, that'll do. You know, I'll take that instead. Yeah.
No, well, we'll come on to this addiction thing. So this will be the personal story. So anyway, there was this big superstructure of heroin and crack, which I later found out was to do with the Afghan revolution and the Nicaraguan revolution. And I was interested in all that from politics. But then, after politics went away in Britain, I did start to get far more into drugs. You know, having smoked weed addictively, completely for years, and we can talk about that when we come on to the sort of addiction stuff. Weed is a very good way of staying in denial about addiction, you know, because there's plenty of people who smoke weed all day, every day, like I did. Literally, from the moment I woke up, I just lived on it. I was never sober, really. But you can sort of say, oh, it's not addictive.
Well, that's what I was going to say, just to quickly jump in on that. I found that funny, when you talk about the hierarchy of addiction as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I know people who smoke weed every day, but still take a negative view on those who've got an opiate dependency.
That was me.
Yeah.
I used to think, well, the negative view was it's actually denial, because you can say, if you're smoking weed all day, every day, and avoiding smack like the plague, because think, fucking hell, look what I'm like with weed. I knew that I was addicted to weed, but at the same time it's not addictive, so I was telling myself I wasn't addicted because it's not heroin or it's not crack. You know, you thought, if you take smack and crack, I am absolutely finished because I know what I'm like. At the same time, I'm telling myself I'm not an addict because I'm smoking weed, so it completely makes no sense. And I always had this horrible feeling that I was addicted, and yet I could tell myself that I wasn't. This is the strange thing about denial, isn't it? That we're always looking for some way to say I'm not an addict, or I'm not as bad as so and so. And I'm sure you get
see it all the time. Yeah.
Don't steal handbags, don't inject in their groin or whatever. So I've never taken heroin. It was always the thing I was never going to do, and actually I never did. Everything else I did, and this all happened after politics went away, and I just drifted off into. I felt I was really lost, and I actually put that down to. Not that I was already an addict, but letting go of the side of the swimming pool, if you like, and ending up smoking crack, is only happened after we were defeated. Before that, it was just weed, and in the same way that other people would go to the pub, I would just be. But except it was all the time. And in fact, that's the thing about weed, is you can actually do without it if you have to. It's not like with heroin and crack. You sort of have to do it. With weed, you can, if you need to, not do it. The fact that I didn't, unless I absolutely had to not do it, was all part of the denial.
Yeah.
So let's just go back to your original question, which was, I was a political activist, and I could sort of see what was going on, and then I did jail, and then I really saw the impact of heroin on the community. It was all the most daring and in some ways the cleverest guys were in jail. They were, I remember standing in the lunch queue one day looking at these characters thinking, these are incredible guys. Do you know what I mean? These are, because it was a jail for fours and overs. I got 3.5, my sentence was 3.5 years, but they burnt down Wymot, which was a jail you went to for fours and unders. So I was in the fours and overs jail. So I was with people who got long sentences, and they, you don't get a long sentence unless you're out there really taking risks, and obviously jail's full of failed criminals. At the same time, they were pretty out there guys, you know, and pretty bright guys. And there they are all in jail, when in other parts of the world, people like that are fighting revolutions. And see what I'm saying? And I started to have this feeling that...
What was it that you got busted for?
It was for importing cannabis by the half kilo. But it's a funny story in itself, and it's in my play that follows up from one of my later plays. I've just written a play set in a jail based on my story, which is that we were importing half kilos of cannabis from Spain disguised as chocolate bars, and they were actually chocolate bars. They were covered in chocolate, and the guy in Spain had found these. I'm laughing, but you know, I did get 3.5 years for
well, do you know, this is it though, but it's one of the things where I suppose if you don't laugh you'll cry in it, sort of thing, but it's just the idea of these half kilos of cannabis being covered in chocolate.
I know, and he dipped it in wax first, so the sniffer dogs couldn't detect it. And then he found these, you know, there was in Spain they sold these half kilo. Well, they were half kilos. You could get 2 9 bars. Half kilos of 2/4 pound, what was it, quarter? Anyway, 2 9 bars basically. It looked exactly like it. So you could even open it up and look at it, and you go, oh yeah, it's chocolate, and it weighed the same because it was, you know, half kilo. Yeah. Anyway, so this guy had found it, and so of course, you know, over time we just got away with it for ages. But over time, you get sloppy and, you know,
complacent, and then
when they came, I thought, well, there's no evidence. It wasn't even keeping the stuff in the house. Do you know what I mean? And we thought we were well organised, but there was evidence everywhere. You know what I mean? We absolutely had
the arrogance of it, though.
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
When you think,
I'm untouchable.
Of course,
this was the irony as well, but because I'd been a political activist, and you come up against the police all the time. And you realise how incompetent they are, and you know, you do lose your respect for the law as a criminal, don't you? You know, you know how it works. So anyway, so there was a bit of a toxic combination.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Of losing your fear of the police and getting lazy, and you know, using drugs, of course, at the same time. So things were falling apart anyway. Right, so we've lost track of where we were. Going back to my original play.
Yes, okay.
So the personal stories. Yeah, so, you know, for years, as a political activist and a drug user, seen plays about drugs with no political content, you know, and I was starting to find out where it used to frustrate me, you know. And I thought that I wanted to write a play. When my students sort of said, oh, yeah, we're interested in that. And then, you know, I was telling them about the Nicaraguan revolution, the Afghan revolution, how the drugs. And I'd started to research, and I'd come across this book, which was recommended to me by Oliver Stone, not in person, obviously, but he in a documentary film. There's this film called, there's this book which Oliver Stone mentions in one of the document. You know, he's sort of like well interviewed, isn't he? And he makes quite big political films. And somewhere in all that, he recommends this book called, what was it called? Let me get this right. The title right was The Politics of Heroin, the CIA and International Drugs, you know, Politics of Heroin, the CIA and International Drug Smuggling, something like that. And I was thinking, blimey, that's interesting. Yeah. And, it, you know, of course, he's not saying that all international drug dealing is done by the CIA. But, ... when you look at it, you can't really have drug dealing on the scale that you've got. A whole country being flooded with heroin after the early 90s in the wake of Thatcherism and all that violence, and the violence against the working class communities, and then the uprising by the working class communities against the police. You can't have a heroin epidemic on that scale without political protection. You just can't. And in this book, the CIA and I can't remember the exact title. I'm really sorry.
No, it's okay.
You can put it in the show notes. I'll tell you after we look it up. But anyway, the CIA drug dealing epic Bible by this guy who spent his life. He's a really well known professor. W.M. McCoy, his name is, and he goes out into the mountains of Vietnam, Laos, and eventually ends up in Nicaragua. But mainly, it's the heroin side of things. And he interviews all the dealers. He introduces all the generals, and the French army was flying tons of opium from the hills into Vietnam. Well, because Vietnam War was first against the French and then against the Americans, and both the French and the Americans were involved in huge amounts of drug dealing. The French were doing it directly, using their own military planes to fly it into from the mountains to Vietnam, where it was refined. And the Americans were just protecting people. So the difference was the French were doing it themselves, and the Americans were just providing political cover and guns, etc., to the people who were doing it, providing planes and cover and banking. And the more you read this book, and it's a really big, fat, detailed book. The more you read it, the more you realise it's impossible to do that sort of drug dealing without governments. It's a government. It's a massive industry.
It's a bold argument, isn't it? So that the heroin epidemic wasn't accidental. Did it take you a while to sort of put these things together?
It was when I read that book.
That was the thing that
and this guy is not saying the CIA did all the drug dealing.
No, okay, but it's just saying that it couldn't happen without
the political backing of huge international political networks. So that, and we've done a podcast about this, which you could get online, called The Political History of Smack and Crack, if you're interested in knowing more, and we'll put the book in the show notes. But there was a case study during the course of his investigations of an independent, so on the same scale that the protected dealers were operating, a freelance dealer was doing the same sort of thing, and he lasted about 18 months before he was busted. He had all the contacts you'd need, the same networks, but he was independent. It wasn't protected, and it's just impossible. You can't do it. It failed.
Some people would think that's some form of conspiracy theory, though.
Well, exactly. This is the thing about conspiracy theories, isn't it? Where
there's always a little bit of truth to them, isn't there?
Well, yes, there is, totally. Not always, but the point is, there's a whole this is a whole new thing you've raised there.
I know.
There's the whole Steve Bannon thing that there's an argument to say that Steve Bannon's slogan, Steve Bannon being the right-wing American who was backing, who sort of masterminded Trump's first campaign. So he's a right-wing podcaster / billionaire-backed political hack, and he was connected to the lot who got Johnson elected in Britain. But he has this slogan about conspiracy theories where the idea is to, and this is a quote, flood the zone with shit. So if you pump out conspiracy theories, everything that is, and then you can. So W.M. McCoy, this scholar who's spent his life studying this and documenting it exactly, and really researching something properly, it just sounds like a conspiracy theory because of all the shit that's out there, pumped out by these right-wing organisations who know full well that what they're saying is shit, but then everything sounds like a conspiracy theory. So any political analysis done, any serious analysis, is just going to sound like one of those right-wing conspiracy theories. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is incredibly well-documented stuff that a lot of it comes out of congressional hearings that the American government themselves carried out 10 years after it all happened into the Nicaraguan stuff. The crack epidemic, basically. So, it does sound like a conspiracy theory, but it's not a conspiracy theory. The conspiracy theory is, oh, yes, Margaret Thatcher, and this would be a conspiracy theory. You say, oh, yes, Margaret Thatcher organised all the drug dealing and organised the heroin epidemic in Britain to put down the riots. That is not what happened. And the play never makes that accusation. And, of course, the Spectator magazine's review of the play is, oh, yes, exactly. They immediately pick up, oh, yeah, this is a ridiculous statement. Margaret Thatcher didn't organise heroin epidemic. And, of course, I go enormously out of my way to make sure we never say that. And to be really clear about what the facts are in the play. But the play is not about that. The play is about two addicts trying to get clean, having a relationship when you should never have a relationship. In the first year of recovery, everyone says, do not have a relationship in your first year because you will be using each other like drugs, etc. So it's a messy love story about two people who try to rescue each other in the first year of addiction and all the mistakes you make when you first get clean. That is what the play is about. And I tried to get all the stuff about the CIA into the play. You can't do it. A drama has to be about emotions, about characters, about conflict, all that stuff, personal stuff. So that's why it's both, to come back to your original point, the play is both a love story, and mainly a love story, a fucked up love story.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Well, this is it, because I mean, it balances the harsh realities, should we say, of like crime, obviously prostitution, relapse, survival, but it's done with humour, with love. Why was it essential for you to show addiction in all its humanity, rather than just reducing it to like pure despair, which is what people often think, don't they?
Yeah, I know. Well, this is because, like, we go back to what we were saying about the Basketball Diaries and those sorts of films about dealing and about drugs, is they are generally about the despair and the gloom. And, you know, when you hear a share at a convention and someone's been to the bottom, it's really powerful to hear them saying all that stuff. But largely, the best shares are when they start getting clean and the struggles, you know, the room sort of goes really quiet. Then everyone's going, oh, yeah, I've been there. Or that's a bit like me. Oh, God, glad I never did that. This guy's amazing because he's been there and done it. But the bit where you can hear a pin drop is when they start talking about getting clean, you know, and the challenges of getting clean. And should we just talk about that? Is that what?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, and you know, my first 7 years of recovery, I would say, looking back now, I was bonkers, absolutely bonkers, because I used drugs to stay sane. You know, without drugs, an addict, I was absolutely fucking bonkers. Could not. You know, that's why I use drugs every day.
Of course, yeah.
All day, every day, because I didn't know how to live without them. So it took me 7 years before I felt, probably, although I was going to say before I felt like a human being. But did I, and do I still? You know, it's only when I go to a meeting now, and of course, being a long time clean now, I go to less meetings than I should, because you get a life, and you know, there's all the things that you have to do, like ill parents and, you know, kids, etc., etc. So you get less and less time. But sometimes I just go to a meeting and sit in the chair, and you go, there's this like sort of sigh of relief, where you go, oh yeah, this is where I belong, and I don't feel as mad. Just because against normal people, I use that word, you know, I hate to use that term, but there's a certain definitely normal people who don't get why we do what we do. And, you know, it's like I say, when I took the drugs away, I was bonkers, you know. I was sort of more dangerous than I was when I was using, in some ways, because I found it harder to control my feelings and you know, acting out on your feelings, as opposed to just suppressing them or changing them through drugs, which is quite simple, really.
Well, this is the whole thing that fascinates me. You said, you know, putting yourself against normal people they don't understand. I mean, I'm not lived experience myself, but it fascinates me when I hear people's stories, because, again, like you said, not to use the term normal, but I will hear stories and think that first thing there would have been enough for me to sort myself out. Yeah. But there's that first thing, then there's the next thing, and the next thing, and it just goes da 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 da. And I'm thinking, how did this continue? Do you know? So the frame of mind though that you're in, it does fascinate me.
Yeah. Well, again, you know, I've got a sister who's quite sensible. She's very sensible, and me and my mum and my other sister are not sensible. You know, my mum was brought up by an alcoholic, and I think it's affected me and my other sister for some reason, but not my other sister, who's really, you know, very sensible. Yeah. And she just does not get us, you know. Yeah. She doesn't get us. Not, I mean, she loves us, but she does not get us. Well, why don't you just? And you think, well, why don't I just? And this is where the self-loathing comes in, isn't it? this is why addiction is a spiral downwards, because I've got an interesting thought about why it's a spiral upwards being in recovery, but it's a spiral downwards because you say, tomorrow, I don't know how many days I didn't say, tomorrow I'm not going to use. And in some ways, the period when I was just using weed, I say just using, I mean all day, every day.
Yeah.
Apart from when I didn't need to, which again helped with my denial, because see, I didn't use till the evening that day. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
so it can't be that bad,
do you know what I mean? Always that. But the worst thing about, if you're using heroin, you can at least go, it's addictive, I've got to do this. There's a sort of a justification. I'm an addict, and you blame the drugs. You don't go, most people are going, it's because of the drugs. The common wisdom of heroin is that a heroin addict needs to use drugs, otherwise they
because
have
of the physical dependency,
so
the withdrawal.
There's a sort of a justification for what you do. If you're using a non-addictive drug and you do it every day and you tell yourself you're not going to do it and you still do it, that's pretty terrible for your self-esteem, because you've got no excuse.
So why did you keep using it then? There's the question.
I now know it's because I'm an addict. Yeah. Whereas when I first came round, if you'd have asked me that, I'd have said because I'm a dickhead, because I'm a twat, because I've got no self-control, because I'm an idiot, because I'm lazy, because whatever. You've got no, you can't, you literally don't understand it. And this is where recovery comes in, because you walk into that room and everybody in that room except you understands why you do that. It's because you're an addict, not because you're a wanker.
Did you experience a hierarchy within those circles?
Yeah, of course I did.
Because people will be looking at you when you talk about a cannabis addiction, looking at you going, it's only cannabis, mate. Do you know, whilst they've got a full-blown opiate addiction. I was going
to say that, because when Robbie told me that, part of what you look at is stigma.
Yeah.
When I first came around, this was early 90s, most of the people were proper smackheads, and had such incredible horror stories. And I'd be thinking, oh shit, I can't tell. I had smoked crack, but it just hadn't gone down as far as they had. I had done jail. A lot of them had not done jail, like I had done 3.5 years in jail. But still, most of my using was cannabis. It's like,
oh, bless him.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? It's a bit like, I can't really. Yeah, it's so. And they say, oh, do you want to come and tell your story in jail? I'm thinking, those guys are just going to look at me and go, you dickhead.
Yeah.
So I didn't do that stuff, It was just ridiculous to expect me to sit in a room in a jail with a bunch of, who are still in denial, probably.
Yeah.
It's only later that, anyway, so yeah, you're exactly right that, in those early days, you'd think, and strangely enough, I didn't even use alcohol. Do you know what I mean? I'd drink when I didn't have drugs. That was the only time I drank. I didn't like alcohol, partly because my granddad died of it, and my mum was brought up by him, etc. So alcohol was this horror story for me to be avoided with heroin and crack, because I thought, I know what I'm like. If I get onto that, I'm done.
So it's interesting to have that awareness of it, though, and also to be able to kind of label yourself as an addict without the physical dependency, because you're looking at it as like a behavioural
I didn't label
thing.
Myself as an addict, but I did think I had, I thought if I take smack, this is the denial. So you can't, it didn't have the tools to understand what I was going through. So like you say, it's interesting that I would think of myself as an addict without going, oh, I'm an addict, without understanding what addiction is, which is that you can't use drugs successfully in any form without it making you do things that normal people don't do, to use that phrase again. Which I'm sure you can relate to.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So how important do you think it is to, especially with the play as well, to challenge the stereotypes around people who use drugs? Because you don't necessarily fit into that stereotype, I don't. But kind of not.
Yeah, I think I do. Oh, yeah, I was just telling you. So I never touched alcohol. I only drank when I didn't have drugs, because I needed something, to have something. And so it was my relapse. After 13 years of sobriety, not a single drug had passed my lips for 13 years. I had a tequila.
Yeah.
And 4 years later, 3 years, I can't even remember now, about 3.5 years later, I'm drinking with everybody else. So, you go out to the pub, drink with people, a normal amount of drunkenness, and then go home and I'd have a bottle of vodka and a bottle of whiskey, which would last 3 days, on top of all the other drinking. And that was, I had a sort of a honeymoon period with alcohol because I'd never really done it in my relapse. So for a time, so here's the other thing. So over those 13 years, I gradually doing less meetings, getting a life. I was a professional writer, all sorts of stuff like that. The normal things you get when you get clean. And so I'd got all that stuff together. But I'd not been in recovery for a while, I now realise, and I've been sitting in meetings. This is a symptom of relapse for me now. Symptom of a pending relapse is you're sitting in meetings going, if that fucking dickhead shares that again, I am going to go crazy. Yeah. Oh my God, why are they doing this? I hate meetings. They really do. And I'm sitting there going, I'm coming away from a meeting. Oh, I'm just knocking my mic here. Sorry. I'm coming away from meetings going, oh, this meeting's doing my head in. And I didn't resolve that. So I just do less meetings, and sometimes I go, sometimes they'd be good, sometimes they would, but there's always that niggling thing of, they're reading the traditions again. Why do they have to read the traditions every meeting? Starting to irritate me, not understanding why. And gradually pulling back from meetings, living a quote normal life, and then starting to drink. But because I was not in recovery, I was only not drinking and smoke. I was not drinking, taking drugs. So I was, white knuckling it is the cliche term. So I was doing other things to fix my feelings other than taking drugs. So that when I did relapse, to begin with, it did solve my problems, and I had a honeymoon period where I was really fucking enjoying drinking, and it was helping because I had all these things that would normally be solved through going to meetings or whatever, recovery, feeling uncomfortable, and drink fixed that. And that was, it took a while before it really hit me, and I'd drink weekends, and then the weekends would get longer, and then I'd be drinking every night, and then it was, earlier and earlier, and then it was just absolutely hit me like a ton of bricks. And that was actually much worse, the alcohol, than any of the drug taking I ever did.
Is that because the physical dependency that comes with alcohol, or was it kind of circumstantial around the way life was at that time?
Good question. It was just the sheer desire to drink and the amount I could drink. I'd built up such a tolerance, like I say, and I was shocked. And I hadn't had enough either. I came back to recovery before I'd had enough. I came back for the benefits of, taking someone else to a meeting. Again, which is what I did to begin with. I was, I found NA through trying to help a heroin addict who I thought was an addict, and I kind of was just a normal drug taker. Usual matters. Took them to a meeting, and they started telling me, you're an addict. And I was like, what? And then eventually went to a meeting and thought, oh, bloody hell, I am. So again, so let me just go back. So that was when I identified what it was like going to a meeting and saying, oh, we're treating the traditions again. Oh, that guy shit. I was straight back into that. Not enjoying meetings again. And so I said to someone, I shared about it, and someone came up to me after and said, Ed, why don't you, instead of thinking, what am I going to get out of this meeting, think, what can I put into this meeting? So you give something to the meeting rather than going to a meeting thinking it's going to be like a drug, make me feel better, go home, fixed. No. Sit there in the meeting and listen to other people. Is there any experience you've got that can help that person? And then think, I'm going to go and speak to them afterwards. And it's like snapped your fingers. It made all the difference. So my advice to anyone who's in a meeting going, "I fucking dickhead, here's that again. I'm going to go mad." Just drop that and think, I'm not here to get something from the meeting. Is there something I can give to this meeting? Not even if you don't share. Think of someone who's suffering and you've got some experience. Don't try and fix them, but share your experience, strength and hope with them at the end of the meeting. And that is the thing that made the difference. So now when I see myself in a meeting thinking those thoughts, I'll share something about this being a symptom of my relapse was me, or one of the things that made me think. So that's a relapse.
I've heard people say before, there's always the relapse before the relapse. And kind of what you're explaining then, that sounds like what that was.
Yeah, exactly. I was fixing myself through other pleasures well before, and that led to discomfort. I was just back in my way of running, not dealing with my feelings or whatever. positively. It's that negative cycle. So that then when I did relapse, it actually worked for a while because I needed drugs again. Because I was mad.
I get that. I want to go back to something that you said earlier. Do you know, when we talked about the I suppose the drug crisis and back to the riots of 1981, the collapse of the inner city communities. Looking at more modern day, do you think society still fails to understand addiction as a structural issue rather than simply an individual failing?
Yeah. Obviously, you can only fix it as an individual.
Yeah.
But I do think that addiction and, consumer society. Well, what are you expected to do? You're expected to consume and be, my dad's generation were there's a funny theory about the sort of the period pre-war, immediate post-war and pre-war period. It's post-Second World War I'm talking about, and later consumer society. Those were producing societies where we were expected to put off our pleasures for later, save for the future, build a career, have a job for life, and eventually buy a home or look after your family or live for you're building something. Whereas now we're expected to spend, have it now, do it, just do it, and everything's about consuming and there's no saving and nothing. And so, the theory is that whereas pre-war people suffered, if your mental health problems are supposed to be a sort of a gauge of why does this, so an individual mental health problem is really a sort of little taste of what the whole society is doing. Is a little mirror to the whole of the rest of society. Pre-war society, you had what's it called, where you're repressing your feelings and you get little obsessions that Freud talked about. Oh, I've forgotten the name of it now.
I know, I understand what you mean, though. But the consumerism element is interesting because I think as well, if I think of the change in the last 10, 15 years, if we look at the consumerism back in like the 90s and early 2000s, but now the consumerism is not just spend, but it's also the way we consume media.
No, I know.
Like it's on our phones, scrolling through content, everything has to the instant gratification. And I mean, even the way we shop, it's instant. I order something at 11 p.m. on a night, and I wake up in the morning, it's been posted through the door within 8 hours. I'm like, how the hell did that happen?
I know.
But it's obviously there's the spending element of it, but it's the way we consume media.
And, reels on Instagram, etc.
Well, this is it. I think the interesting thing now is looking at how everyone is competing for our attention.
Yeah.
That's what it is. That's the selling. That's what people are trying to buy, and that's what people are trying to gain. Is your attention? Because there's no
terrifying.
There's no collective now. Me and my producer Robbie spoke about this. Back in the day, I mean, we had Kevin Kennedy on this podcast. He was played Kelly Watts in Coronation Street, and I remember him talking about him and Raquel's wedding was like one of the most watched events. I think on television, the ratings was astronomical. You'll never get those shared collectives now, other than the World Cup or a big sporting event. Because everyone now, what I'm watching tonight on Netflix is different to what you're watching. There's no shared experience anymore. No. So everyone's competing for that. And this is element of our attention.
The fellowships are so brilliant because you literally you walk into a meeting and you feel like you belong.
Yeah.
And that is a massive collective all over the world. You can walk into a meeting in Spain and sit there, even if you don't speak the language, and you'll hear what people are talking about, and you can feel that sense of collective belonging. So NA is actually, I'm not saying it's a political solution, but personally, it's a really big advantage over almost everybody else in society, apart from churchgoers.
Yeah. Well, I often say this. I mean, I see people from the fellowship and that collective sort of gathering and the brotherhood element of it is, God, I'd love that in my life. I know. I'm genuinely jealous of people like you. I mean, if I was struggling at 11 o'clock on a night, I won't be able to ring anybody. I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to talk to someone tomorrow. Whereas it's like, ring me at any time. Do you know, it's just this collective, again, like I say, that brotherhood, that sisterhood element of it is to be desired.
Let's just talk about that. If you sort of think, how does NA work? Well, like I said, when I walked into that room, all that madness, I'm saying, the stupid things, thinking, you could be just say if you just only ever smoke pot.
Yeah.
And so you're using a non-addictive drug, but you're addicted to it, and you keep telling yourself you're not going to do it. And then I walk into that room, everybody in that room knows what that is, and I don't. I've got no idea. I walk in, I know I've got a problem, but I don't know what that problem is. All I know is that someone's told me I'm an addict, I should come to a meeting or whatever. Or if you're a smackhead, it's bloody obvious you've got a problem. But you think it's the smack. Everyone else in that room knows that it's because you can't live without drugs, and that they know how, if you take the drugs away, to teach you how to live without drugs. And you don't know that. So that's a higher power.
Yeah.
I'm an atheist, and yet I walk in that room and there is a higher power there that I can identify really clearly, which is that they know more about me than I know about myself.
Yeah.
Because they are me to a certain extent.
Because some people really get caught up on the religious aspect, the higher power element of it. But what you've just said then, I think that's the nail on the head, isn't it?
And it's still a higher power because they know better than you.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to know that because you go, oh yeah.
Yeah. Someone says something that's
I'm
like,
an addict. I'm not a twat. Well, you might still be a twat, but I'm a twat who's an addict. But you go, oh yeah, it's not because I'm a dickhead, it's because I'm an addict. Which a lot of people go, oh, that's just an excuse. But it really helped me.
Yeah.
Because, so let's talk about that spiral thing again. So you
it's a spiral down the spiral up.
I'm not going to do it. And if it's a non-addictive drug you're doing and you still do it, that in some ways is going to affect your self-worth.
Yeah.
Worse than if you got an excuse of, oh, I've got to do it because I'm an addict, because I'm addicted to an addictive substance. I've got to do this. I had no excuse like that. It was definitely non-addictive. Well, it's known as a non-addictive substance. Anyway, so then I walk into the meeting. They tell me I'm an addict. And I tell you what, I had not had a day since my teenage years when I hadn't used drugs. I think there was one, and I had a can of beer there just in case, and I think it got. And then I went absolutely much worse on drugs after that. That was, starting to get into ecstasy, all that stuff. Eventually, end up smoking crack. But that first day, I actually got a whole day, and I still had some weed at home just in case, and I didn't use it. And then I got one day clean, and went to a meeting the next day, or it might have been the day after, because in those days there wasn't a meeting every day. But I went to a meeting the next day, and it was like 2 days, and people were standing up to get their 30-day keyring. And I was like, oh my God, that's like a lifetime. 30 days without drugs. Could not believe it. And I was thinking, oh my God, that's 3 days. And I started to feel proud of myself quite quickly and thinking, oh my God, this is an incredible achievement. So immediately my self-worth started to come back. And also I could tell myself that it was because I was an addict that I'd done, obviously I can look back and say, well, also because you were a bit dickhead. But it was a really quick win of getting 4, 5, 6, 7 days without drugs. Absolutely unbelievable. I think I might have actually got rid of the weed in my cupboard at that point, thinking, oh, I actually can do this, but I'm going to get rid of it, And then 30 days, that first 30-day keyring, there's nothing like it. You can get a year, get 10 years or whatever, nothing like the first 30-day keyring. It's absolute miracle, and felt like an enormous achievement. And I was an amazing person that I could do that because I was surrounded by people who knew how amazing it was. You tell other people you've gone 30 days without drugs, they'll go, oh, well done. No, you don't get it.
You don't understand.
Impossible.
What sort of benefits did you see in your own life then when you obviously you said the 3 days, the 30 days? I mean, how does life improve?
Instantly. So I'd sat round, because writing's quite a good thing to do when you're off your head. Because you can disappear into this other world really easily. And I used to think I couldn't do anything without fucking drugs.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say, because a lot of people tie their creativity to drug use. I mean, and that's based on, you think of artists like, one of the greatest guitar players of all time, Jimi Hendrix, was known for being a drug user sort of thing. So people think like, oh, that's how you be creative.
Yeah,
the Beatles, you take substances.
And loads of writers, loads of them.
Was you worried your creativity was going to be stifled?
I could never get beyond the first draft, because you can sit there off your head, writing away, making anything up, really complicated, mad ideas, which you enjoy while you're writing them. But you could never sit down and do a second draft because you're off your head. You need clarity for that. So I'd always been a writer, but obviously writing shit. I think it might have started out okay. But
it felt okay.
It felt okay. I'd had a few things earlier on, like I went to university and put stuff on there which was coherent enough, or maybe it was because it was funny. People thought I could write, and then I thought I could write.
Yeah.
And I would write stuff that was okay, but never that it was going to be any bait. So quite quickly I started writing coherent scripts.
Yeah.
And started learning the lessons you need to learn for a second draft, third draft, and doing stuff that made sense and had the ability to do something about it. So very quickly, I started to get ahead, as it were, with writing, and ended up working for television, writing scripts for the Bill, Holby, stuff like that,
So go. I mean, I mentioned this earlier. I don't think we touched on it. For the political history of Smack and Crack, based on the landscape of media, why was theatre chosen as the model?
Well, I started
off for this.
I did a degree in drama, had a great time, and I was still in the early days of my addiction then, so it hadn't really thrown me. It's a strange one, isn't it? Because with weed you can do almost nothing for years, but you don't notice that you're not progressing.
Yeah.
But so in the early days, I still had enough energy and creativity to get into theatre and do it. And then I did a sort of a circus show afterwards, and I could stay. We'd do it in the day, so I could stay sober long enough to do all that, learn some real lessons. And so theatre was kind of my first love. But there's no money in theatre.
Yeah.
There's no money in writing novels. You have to write television if you're going to make any money. Or, as I do now, I teach 3 days a week and top up my income with theatre, which you can earn a bit of money on, but it's very hard to earn a living as a theatre writer.
Yeah.
There's hardly anyone who's going to do that. So it's a bit like, and I really enjoy teaching because as a writer, you can end up sat in a room on your own forever, never meeting anybody. So what you're going to write about. So teaching gets you out the house, as does going to meetings.
Yeah. Well, obviously, you are a writer. You're a storyteller. Do you see story? You mentioned obviously the activism. Do you see storytelling as like a form of activism, especially particularly when it comes to like challenging stigma and exposing uncomfortable truths? Shall we say?
Good question. Yeah. So I don't think, unfortunately, writing a play is going to change the world like the way I'd like it to do. You'd want it to be like what's the word? A hand grenade.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it would, or a machine gun. Yeah. It's not that. Eventually capitalism is going to have to be overthrown, and theatre can help people who are doing that feel better, probably. Yeah. And I write it as if it's going to change the world, and sort of have that. It's
an interesting starting point, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you don't downplay what you are putting out there.
To change the world. But I'm realistic enough politically to know that it isn't going to actually do that.
Yeah.
But that's better because I think I find it easier to write now that I know that, and I can just do it because I do love it.
Yeah.
And I think it has got a play. And, once I go too far down that thoughts of, what's the point of this? Yeah. It all falls apart. Yeah. So I sort of think, art is important.
Yeah.
Even though it reaches possibly, it doesn't, it's sort of, is it just middle class dickheads who go to the theatre? Or is it, but as soon as I start thinking all that, I just think, well, why bother? And so, but I do love it. I absolutely love it.
Do you
feel
believe
the need
that,
to do it?
Do you believe that art can shift public attitudes, though?
There's a long pause, wasn't it? I'm rolling my
time
eyes
to think about your answer,
rubbing my chin. I think probably it can, and obviously it does. That post office drama recently. Of course it does. Not as much as a communist revolutionary would like it to.
Of course,
but of course it does. And I think it's even more important. For example, in early recovery, if you get involved in an arts project and it keeps you from thinking about taking drugs for a couple of days, that's great, and it gets you out there and you've got something other than, it's really important to do your recovery and go to your meetings, etc. But you do need other stuff to do to keep you off the streets, as it were. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's great for that. All those things, it's got a really, but you can't overstate its role.
Yeah.
What changes the world is political action.
Yeah.
And everything else is a bonus and helps do all that.
Have you seen, obviously, with Fiat, have you seen audience reactions that made you realise the play was changing people's perspectives?
I've had really nice responses. And it's a solidarity thing, I think. As much as, oh yeah, that was, I feel less alone. Do you know what I mean? I felt like that was me, or I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But I think what people really, they do love the politics in the political history of Smack and Crack, but they really love Neil and Mandy and their
characters
journey.
and
That's what people love.
Yeah.
And you have to remember that.
Just going into this a little bit more than stuff for audience coming to see your performances. What do you hope that they leave understanding, not just about addiction, but about Britain, policy, and the communities that are still living with these consequences today as well?
Yeah, that's a big question. There's two aspects to it. Obviously, there's a sort of propagandistic side of it. I want people to know that the heroin was coming into the country, where it was coming from. But there's only a few lines in the play. But what I really want in this play, it's that in 1981, you could reduce it down to a couple of lines, really.
Yeah.
So it's a political history of Smack and Crack. You'd say, before the riots in 1981, you couldn't really buy brown heroin. Brown heroin wasn't really a thing then. You couldn't really buy heroin on the streets. It was just students, rock bands, those sort of people, ex-students. A few hippies who'd been to Afghanistan or whatever. They were the people who were the smackheads. There was 3,000 addicts in Britain, basically, at the end of the 70s. By 1985, there's 30,000 addicts. And most of the ones before that were middle class, and now they're all working class. That's the big thing I want to get across, and people can make of that what they want. I will help them with a few other facts about the politics of it. But I'd want addicts to go, oh yeah, that's me. Look, there's Neil and Mandy having their fucked up relationship. God, I love Mandy, and to cry at the end because there's a bit of a reverse. She starts clean, and I don't want to give too many spoilers. So there's a lots of drama type stuff of this love story, but also to go, do you know what? They're bastards. We need to do something about this, don't we? That little thought there as well. That would be good enough for me, I think.
Now, Ed, thank you so much for joining me on Believing People. I like to finish all our podcasts with a series of quick fire questions just to change the mood a little bit. And my first one is, what's your favourite word?
My favourite word? Oh, I had a good one the other day. I was thinking, my favourite word. I did have one I really liked the other day. There's a few. Turquoise.
Turquoise, isn't it? Yeah, it sounds off the tongue a little bit as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Least favourite word?
Or, things like, I don't even want to say it. Yeah, okay, least favourite word that's a respectable word. Oh, yeah, it's going to be something like team.
Team.
Like at work. Oh,
we're a team.
Yeah, team meeting. Yeah. Come on.
I've always hated the narrative of, we're not a team, we're a family.
Oh, that's even one. That's one
can't
down.
Do that. Cannot do that. And if that
worse.
happened here, I think I'd be out the door in a second.
I've not heard that one yet. It hasn't reached me.
Well, it hasn't happened here so far. I think that's why I've worked here for 11 years, maybe. That's probably why I've done well here.
Yeah.
Tell me something that excites you.
Actually, at the moment, Manchester United for the first time for a long time.
I was going to say that will be the first time for a very long time, won't it? Tell me something that bores you or drains your energy that isn't Manchester City.
What bores me?
Bores you or drains your energy?
Yeah. Good question. Rubbish TV.
Yeah, understandable. And there's a lot of it out there.
You look on Netflix, God. It's how many things you want to watch on Netflix.
This is it. This is what I mean about the consumerism.
Who writes that stuff?
Exactly.
That's my question.
Yeah. A sound or noise that you love?
Oh, got a song thrush, or a curlew, or the sea. My favourite sound is, there's a certain type of fir tree, the one with the big pine, not the big needles, and when the wind goes through that is my best.
I think I recognise that one. What sound or noise do you hate?
What? Yeah, I can't say the first thing that comes into my mind there, but yeah. Ooh, you've got me there. Is it something like a Labour politician?
I had a feeling it was going to be something about Starmer, actually.
Wes Streeting.
Okay.
Anything that he says.
Yeah, interesting. When do you feel most like yourself?
Not in the morning, first thing. I don't like the mornings. And then I'm not too keen on the afternoons.
You've just got a sweet spot between like 10 and 1 p.m. Well, your entire day is just misery.
It's early, sort of mid-morning. I start to feel like a human being.
Yeah,
I can get a few things done.
I get that. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Oh, you mean as in and be good at, if I could be?
If you could be anything, what would it be?
A gymnast or a singer.
Gymnast would be a good one.
Yeah, but then it's a really limited, by the time you're 27. Yeah. Whereas a singer, you could always sing. Yeah. And I'm not a good singer, so I've always thought singing is the best thing to be.
I've often said if I had 3 wishes from a genie, one of them would be to sing. I'd just love to. I'd love to be able to sing.
Yeah, me too.
What profession would you not like to do?
Labour politician.
And lastly,
any of those parliamentary, none of that.
And lastly, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You took your time.
Brilliant. Ed, thank you for joining me on Believe in People.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been fun. Thank you.
And if you've enjoyed this episode of the Believe in People podcast, we'd love for you to share it with others who might find it meaningful. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode, and leaving a review will help us reach more people and continue challenging stigma around addiction and recovery. For additional resources, insights and updates, explore the links in this episode description. And to learn more about our mission and hear more incredible stories, you can visit us directly at believeinpeoplepodcast.com.